Hi, David Mould here. That clip on your screen? Those are images from France's Charlie Hebdo tragedy. And this is the Pope's response.
È vero che non si può reagire violentamente, ma se il dottor Gasparri, grande amico, mi dice una parolaccia contro la mia mamma, ma ti aspetta un pugno. Ma è normale.
Opportunistic, at the very least. And maybe there's something much more sinister going on here. What this entire tragedy has done is to spark two sermons in my head. The first is somewhat of an overview of Satan's strategy of demonizing Mrs. White and of ensuring books like The Great Controversy become hate speech. The second sermon goes beyond anything I have ever preached before. In light of this Charlie Hebdo tragedy, and in light of the Pope coming to the United States to address Congress in September, there are things we need to preach now that could easily get those of us preaching them killed. That's what I said, killed. And that is no exaggeration. You who are watching this need to get it into your heads that some of us carrying these last day messages are risking our lives. You'll see what I mean before this clip ends. But if you think the devil is just going to sit down while we expose the Antichrist before the world, you're wrong. Listen, let me tell you something. Look at that footage on your screen. Do you know what you're looking at? Do you really? The fingerprints of the Vatican are all over this, but who is talking? Who's connecting the dots for the world? How many really know that Adolf Hitler's rise to power can be traced to the manipulative hands of Eugenio Pacelli, the Cardinal Secretary of State who rose to become Pope Pius XII? This isn't hearsay. This is the fruit of meticulous research that utilized the archives of the Vatican itself. We owe a debt of gratitude to Roman Catholic professor John Cornwell for producing what, in my opinion, is the most important book of the 20th century. This book in my hands, Hitler's Pope, which details step by step the work of Pope Pius XII, who overruled even his own bishops to get Adolf Hitler in power. Needless to say, Professor Cornwell has been demonized for his book. We pray that God will keep him. There are many more dots out there that conclusively tie the Vatican to the Holocaust. This morning I'm going to turn to one more, a well-documented dot. I'm referring to the Underground Railroad of convents and monasteries in which some 20,000 Nazis, including some of the biggest butchers of all time, were able to find refuge as they made their way at the end of World War II into the safe haven of Juan and Evita Perón in Buenos Aires. We're talking about monsters like Joseph Mengele, Dr. Death of Auschwitz fame, Klaus Barbie, Adolf Eichmann, Ante Pavlik, men who oversaw the death of millions of Jews and hundreds of thousands of Serbs. These were given false papers, false identities, and courtesy of what became known as the Vatican's rat lines, were transported out of Europe and away from certain death sentences. I said the fingerprints of the Vatican are all over the Holocaust. And thanks to Dr. Google, if you know where to look, they're now available for the world to scrutinize. Why do you believe the Pope wants laws to restrict literature that offends religious sensibilities? Do you honestly believe that this power that sent wave after wave of mercenaries and soldiers to battle Muslims in the 200-year holy wars known as the Crusades, do you really think he cares about offending Muslim sensibilities? The ones who called for these crusades were Pope Francis's predecessors, to whom he is absolutely beholden. No, the bigger issue by far is that he knows that increasingly, in court records, in print, and on the internet is information that absolutely condemns the Vatican. That's what he'd like to keep buried throughout eternity. For heaven's sake, this Pope is from Argentina. He knows about the rat lines, for that's where thousands of these butchers ended up. That's where the Jewish Mossad, the Secret Service, caught Adolf Eichmann on the 11th of May 1960, living under the assumed name of Ricardo Clement. The Pope knows these things and probably trembles for the future of the papacy as more and more information about Catholic atrocities and Jesuit intrigue seeps into the consciousness and becomes common knowledge. As Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he probably handled the same formerly top secret files that I did. What in the world drew me to Argentina? Who sent me there? My background was Jamaica and the horse racing venue of Caymanas Park. What in the world was I doing in Argentina? I'll tell you what brought this about. In 1992, when the BBC announced that these formerly top secret files were being released to the world, I felt strangely drawn to Buenos Aires. If I was to preach about these files, then I had to see them for myself. I had to handle them for myself. Beloved, without distinction, repute, or fame, I am a mere layman, drawn like a moth to the flame by anything that will substantiate the Bible's claims against Roman Catholicism. This was the legacy of my having come to a rudimentary understanding of Daniel 7, and of having also read the great controversy cover to cover at least a dozen times prior to the release of those files. Call it a divine impulse. But as time went on, I began sensing in my soul that the day would probably come when God would require me to open my mouth to draw attention to those files. 22 years have gone by since I traveled to Argentina to handle these files, and I've said very little about them. But if God sees that now is the time for me to open my mouth, then so let it be. But why now? Because the Vatican is on the verge of a stunning victory. Let me tell you what I mean. Whereas Pope Pius XII clearly used Hitler to do his dirty work, it can be argued that Pope Francis is using Islam to do his. For if nothing else, whether Islam knows it or not, they're being royally used by the Pope to shut down the press before a multitude of Vatican sins are brought before the world. It's not just pedophilia or the corruption of the Vatican Bank that we're dealing with here. The Holocaust has been called the central tragedy of Western civilization. That's what I believe God is about to bring before the world. And I believe the Vatican is shrewd enough to sense that the continuing free access to information in print and on the internet and elsewhere could spell her doom. It was Thomas Jefferson who wrote, quote, "No experiment can be more interesting than that we are now trying, and which we trust will end in establishing the fact that man may be governed by reason and truth. Our first object should therefore be to leave open to him all the avenues to truth. The most effectual hitherto found is the freedom of the press. It is therefore the first shut up by those who fear the investigation of their actions." End quote. That's a letter to Judge John Tyler, June 28, 1804. What is Jefferson talking about? Freedom of the press. What did he call it? The first shut up by those who fear the investigation of their actions. That's precisely what the Pope is trying to do. To blunt discussion, to stop discussion, to shut up the press, and he's using Islam to do it. He probably won't stop until a constitutional convention is held in the United States and the First Amendment is completely repudiated, replaced by a clause that will make it a crime to speak a word that offends any religion. Who knows what divinely inspired proposal he's going to make before Congress in September. What I do know is that if the sins of Babylon are to be exposed the way I believe God desires them to be exposed, by that I mean trumpeted around the world, in the mainstream media, on social media, in documentaries, speeches, in books, ads, and sermons, then it stands to reason that some of us who have been educated by the Spirit of God and are called to this work, some of us who could argue our cases successfully, convincingly, in a court of law, some of us whose research could endure cross-examination before 1,000 Nurembergs, it stands to reason that some of us are going to get killed before that word ever escapes our lips. That's how it was with the Waldenses. That's how it was most recently with Alberto Nisman. Never heard the name? Nisman, an Argentinian federal prosecutor, was found dead on January 18th, 2015. Dead with a gunshot wound to his head barely hours before he was due to testify about the bombing of the building that housed those formerly top secret files. Let me tell you one interesting thing. When we landed in Buenos Aires, and I had contacted the BBC, and they had put me in touch with the cameraman that they had used for their report, which is what brought me to Buenos Aires. One of the first places, as a matter of fact, the first place that he took us to was there was a place, a building. Apparently a building had been there. I wouldn't have known. The place was as flat as the back of my hand. It was the Israeli embassy, or the former Israeli embassy. That had been bombed before we got into Argentina. A number of people were killed. I think it might have been in the 60s or 70s. I'm not sure. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I asked the guide, why have you taken us here? And I said, well, why did they do this? And he said, the same reason you've come. Those files. Let me tell you what had happened. The Argentinian government had turned those files with the identities of these 20,000 former Nazis and butchers over to the Israelis. The Israelis had those files. They were classifying them, archiving them, going through everything. And also, it was from the Israeli embassy that the capture of Adolf Eichmann had been orchestrated. The Mossad had come in and, as I said, had taken him captive, took him back to Israel, tried him for war crimes, and executed him. Well, that blast was a clear message to the Israelis: lay off. Leave this hot potato alone. Okay? Well, you can imagine how I felt as we went around photographing things and watching, going over the files. Interestingly enough, after we left, about a year after, there was another blast. This one turned out to be the largest terrorist blast in Argentina's history. And the building housing those files was itself blown to pieces. 85 people were killed, the archivists. What happened to those files, I don't know. But I know that the top person whom we had interviewed, who had the responsibility over those files, I got through to him about a year later, and he was alive. But you can imagine what this did to the Israelis in Buenos Aires. Who did those files indict? The Vatican. It was their rat lines that brought these butchers into Buenos Aires. But anyway, so as it was with Nisman, so it was with the Waldenses, so it will be with us. The Word of God says, as it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. That's Romans 8:36. But it's not just the Bible. What does Mrs. White have to say about this? In Great Controversy 609, she describes a time coming when those of us now filled with zeal for God, zeal to preach His word, zeal to expose the Antichrist, those of us filled with this zeal will be threatened with destruction and will be ready to say, and this is a direct quote, had we foreseen the consequences of our words, we would have held our peace. Let me translate that for you. What we've just been told is that even before the storm fully hits, many of God's faithful latter-day warriors will be ready to exclaim, if we could have foreseen the trouble, the fire, the hell hell that our words and our exposés were going to stir up, we would never have opened our mouths. That's what's coming when the wickedness, those are Mrs. White's words, the wickedness of the Antichrist is revealed before the world. Come, let's read it together. I'll put it up on your screen. This is from Evangelism, page 233. Quote, in the very time in which we live, when? In the very time in which we live, the Lord has called his people and has given them a message to bear. He has called them to expose the wickedness of the man of sin. End quote. Exposing Roman Catholicism's wickedness is going to come with a terrible price. If the Pope has his way, we might have to break new literary laws in order to do it. Like Gutenberg or Tyndale caught in the act of printing the Bible, it's a task that's going to get some of us killed, exposing the Antichrist. But it's a task that has to be completed, fear or no fear, law or no law, for God has ordained it so. Never forget, in Revelation 18, the last invitation to the world, come out of her, my people, come out. This is the final invitation to be given to the world, and we must give the world reasons why they need to come out of Babylon, that fallen system of religion. To be sure, I would like to remain alive so that I can finish our work on the great controversy. But the impulse to preach and to advertise and to shout the things that I know from the rooftops, to do it now, that impulse is strong on me. Pray for me, please, that I'll make the right decision, either to open my mouth even more than I've done in this little introductory clip, or to wait the 2 years until the work of gathering the photographs for the revised edition of the new illustrated great controversy is over. By then, though, if the Pope has his way, laws could have already been passed which would make this book illegal, which would make my having waited worthless. So what am I supposed to do, dear Jesus? What am I supposed to do? I don't hear voices. I don't get dreams and visions. What am I supposed to do? Listen, while we try to figure this out, if you're new to our website and unfamiliar with the work that we're doing on the great controversy, if you're unfamiliar with the new, much more attractive and much more marketable look that we're giving this classic, then you need to go immediately to the video. This isn't your grandmother's great controversy. Go now, please. Don't even bother going to our homepage. Save that for later. Click on the button to your right and go straight to that video. You'll see what the Lord has laid on our hearts. And you watch it. As you watch it, please pray earnestly for us. By the way, if anything should happen to me before this book is completed, or before either of the 2 sermons sparked by the Charlie Hebdo tragedy is posted online, then please use social media and get this little introduction that you're watching now. I said please use social media to get this little clip disseminated as far and as wide as you can. Let not my work or my death be in vain. In fact, why not download it now? Just in case. Hey, welcome to LRL TV. May God bless you.